Matt, I just had a very interesting conversation uh, with Bob, Dirk, and Eric. I found it to be very insightful. You were here as well, and you got to view the conversation. So I would love to get your take on it. But first, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Matthew Arist, and I'm the Director of Sustainability and ESG at CGI, and it's my responsibility to build out that practice and create the thought knowledge around that practice and help our clients out. I started my career in capital markets, and I worked in capital markets for 20 years, doing debt origination syndication and structured trading, and then working on sort of large regulatory and risk projects. And around 2018, I kind of got interested in sustainability because it kind of scratched me where I itched. And I'm a bit of an environmentalist myself, and I like the outdoors. So I studied sustainability and ESG at Harvard, Oxford, Wharton, Lake Hull Polytechnique. And so that's sort of where I got my education. And I've kind of been quoted in a few media publications, including Financial Times on sustainability and ESG.
Wow, that is very impressive. Congratulations on uh, the publications. I would like your thoughts on the conversation that I just had with our panelists. Um, what stood out to you the most from that discussion?
Yeah, so I think you put together an amazing panel. I think it's very interesting. A lot of fascinating things they said. That, if we cover ESG and sustainability, the conversation could be go on for days. Especially with those guys, especially people who know a bit about the subject. You could talk about the E, the S, or the G alone, and you could go on for probably an hour. Yeah, I mean, so there were a number of themes I think that were talked about. So we talked about, or they talked about ESG and sustainability, the differences. They talked about sort of solutions. They talked about ESG scoring. They talked about disparity, so developed world versus developing world, and sort of how do we get to this sort of framework for everybody. They talked about governance, and they talked about what people and companies can do. And then they talked about what governments should do and how they can help out and what role they play.
Right. Was there anything in particular that stood out to you in that conversation?
Yeah, there are a lot of things, a lot of interesting points were made on those very themes that I sort of brought up. I mean, I think one interesting thing, I'm a bit of a proponent of sustainability. So that's what I believe it kind of is. And I think that ESG is actually a subset of sustainability, because sustainability would include everything. So that would include your financials. It would include everything you're doing to address ESG factors. So those issues. And sustainability ultimately is, the sustainability of the company within its environment, right? So I thought that conversation was a little interesting. I think definitely the conversation around ESG scoring was an interesting conversation. And I mean, I could go on all afternoon about ESG scoring, but it's very interesting because I do believe one of the most important points that was made is that it is an immature science. So it is a data science, and it is an immature data science. The data itself is immature, right? The data sets, the sources that we're getting the data from, right? No one's really had to compile all this data before and sort of take a look at it. The data itself is very different from each other. You're going to compare disparity amongst certain racial groups and sort of try to metric that. And then also in the same data set, you have, your CO2e for your scopes 1, 2, and 3. So it's putting together very, not incongruous data. So if you were to poll a bunch of analysts on the street with regards to an ESG rating, say on some big bank, some of them, there's probably 15 analysts that cover the big banks in Toronto. And I would say probably, a third of them might say buy that particular company. A third of them may say sell that particular company, and a third of them may say hold that particular company. So there's a difference of opinion. That's why we sort of had, like in your Tesla example, some companies rating Tesla very highly, some companies rating Tesla very low. And then you as an investor, what are you to think of that? And what are you to make of it? Yeah, sure. It's very confusing, right? But it's not just the data. It's also just people establishing a certain point of view, right?
I agree with that. And ESG, again, is a very broad topic that you can have conversations with about, for years, because it is still very new, and there are different factions who are fighting for different things and different point of views, different stakeholders. One of the things that has made me hopeful is the ESG practice at CGI that you are leading, because I've gotten to see that there is a genuine desire and push to have actionable results, right? It's not just about doing an assessment for a firm and then giving them a stack of papers and saying, all right, that's what you do. We're actually really trying to give them actionable insights and help them on their journey to becoming better compliant with ESG regulations, and also just having meaningful impact on the surroundings and our world. So from that side, can you speak a bit about CGI's practice and what you're hoping for and the mission with that practice?
Yeah, so we kind of, so at a very high level, what we were hoping for is we want to help our clients. We want to help our clients achieve their sustainability goals. We want to help them establish a strategy that's cohesive and comprehensive and that they can really execute on and understand what they're doing, and that a plan that they can actually integrate into their operations. So we want operationalization, because that's where you'll really achieve and understand and realize the benefits of doing sustainability in ESG. And so we kind of look at our clients in different ways. So we have clients who are involved in the investment industry, so they have specific needs with regards to ESG and sustainability. We have clients that are involved in helping clients issue products, like banks, right? So they have certain ESG needs. And then we have clients who are involved in industry, right? Manufacturing, extractive industries, IT, for example. And so they have specific needs as well. And our role really is to help them through our thought leadership and through our methodology to address the ESG challenges that they have. And there's a number of challenges they have, right? They have challenges with regards to things you already talked about with the panel, like CO2e, so emissions, water usage, plastic, right? They have challenges with regards to ESG reporting, which is soon to become mandatory, right? They have challenges with regards to data, all this data that they have to pull from many different systems, how they integrate it and how they utilize it in a very efficient manner is another problem for companies. It's an enormous amount of data, right? And the collection and metricing of this data, they've really never done before. They're used to reporting on their balance sheet. They're not used to reporting on their CO2e. So this is sort of our role, is to help them achieve all the different tasks that are involved in helping them accomplish sustainability in ESG.
It's a big task, but it's an important one.
Yeah.
And I'm very glad that we've taken up on it, and that, we're willing to kind of do have the difficult conversations, because not all these conversations are comfortable, because especially with larger firms, they become very comfortable in their way of doing things, and so to make changes can be difficult. But I have seen some of the folks at CGI having these conversations. I've seen some of the work that the ESG practice is now doing to really show the benefit of the change, and to help make that change. And I think it's that actionable part that's really important, because it's one thing to get information from, let's say, a consulting firm. It's another thing to have that consulting firm there with you, helping you make those changes. And that's extremely vital to firms, because they, especially with this new arena, as it's been mentioned plenty of times today, this is still a very new field. This is a new science, and everyone is trying to figure their way within this industry and how best they can participate. And I think that firms have made mistakes. There will be some firms that make mistakes in the future, but the important thing is that those mistakes are rectified, and that everyone learns from those mistakes and they're not made again. And whenever there's a new thing, there's always mistakes, and it's to be expected. But that's one of the things that your practice does, is where you learn from them, you learn from the mistakes of others, and you help firms get on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go back to the difficult conversation piece. in a second. But what I want to talk about really, so we look at it from with the lens of basically maturity, materiality, verity, and veracity. So what do these words mean? So materiality, Bob talked about it very early in the panel with regards to single materiality and double materiality. So you hear about this in ESG. And what does this mean? So materiality is the actual significance of certain risks for your company or that your company poses to the environment. So single materiality is what risks that have an impact on your company, right? So it's like stakeholders, it's like the environment. Double materiality is actually the risks that you pose as a company to those stakeholders and to the environment, right? Then when we look at maturity, we look at where is the company on its journey. So are they, and a lot of companies are really stuck in the very beginning because ESG is so big. They're like, well, what do I do? Do I address the S? Do I address the E? Everyone seems to, be so concerned about climate. Maybe I should just focus on the climate piece. And then what's this thing G, which most companies should know a lot about, but you'd be surprised. And then there's verity, which is the truth. How truthful are they being and how true are they to their actual purpose, right? And then there's veracity. How aggressively are they pursuing that particular purpose, right? And from there, we sort of apply, or beneath that, we sort of apply a sort of a 5R framework, which is regulatory, risks, I'm going to probably forget it now, ROSI, reputation, and readiness. Okay. And we apply that to every company and we look at what they're doing with respect to those 5Rs, right? Because it has a very big impact on those ES and G factors.
Well, can you break down the 5 Rs a bit more? Like, what actually are they and how are they measured? What's their impact?
Yeah, so regulatory would be, are you living up to the regulatory expectations? Are you ready for new regulation coming in? What kind of framework do you have or structure do you have to address regulatory issues? So as I said, like ESG reporting is going to be mandatory 2024, and it was mentioned by, I think it was mentioned by Eric, by the SEC and the CSA, which are the securities administrators for Canada and the US. So are companies ready for that reporting, right? What kind of infrastructure do they have in place? What kind of, are they going to be able to transparently report on that in a robust and accurate way? Then we look at reputation. So what kind of risks, what are you doing currently in your current state that's creating more reputational risk for your company, right? Are you addressing any risks out there reputational wise that should be addressed? Companies these days are leaving a lot of risk just out on the table and not addressing it and hoping it won't, make a difference. And then suddenly they have an acute event and they have to react to it. And as we've seen, oftentimes they react very poorly, right? They don't own the mistake or they cover up the records because they don't want anything found in discovery. We all know the famous Ford Pinto case. So companies need to better address these risks that they're leaving on the table. Then we look at the readiness. So where is the company in its journey? Are they ready to do more or are they only able to do so much? And the thing is right now with a lot of companies aren't doing enough. So a little bit of progress is better than no progress at all. Then we look at ROSI, which is a return on sustainable investment. And that was a metric developed by the New York Stern School of Business. And really, this is where the rubber meets the road because companies really want to know if I invest X, right? What am I going to get back for X, right? So, and a lot of this is qualitative. It can't necessarily be immediately metric, but you can explain to them that you're creating these kind of opportunities. And did you think about that before, right? And you're creating the opportunity to innovate. You're creating opportunities to optimize and realize efficiencies, right? So these would all go into the ROSI that companies need to sort of be informed about because when they make decisions, really companies like to make decisions about, I do this, what does it cost? Like, what does it cost in X or what will it deliver to me in X, right? And X is usually a dollar sign.
Right. That makes sense. And these 5 Rs, the sustainability practice that you're leading is able to help firms define and create plans to meet them?
That's correct. Yeah, we create like a roadmap and we look at them, what are they doing around these things? And we say, these 5 things are really the 5 things that you can most address and most handle at the moment. And so we really think you should dig into them. The other thing I wanted to, so with regards to the 5 R's, one thing I wanted to talk to you about or go back and visit was the hard conversation piece and the frank conversation. So we had a conversation with the bank earlier this year, and they had said they were going to reduce their expenditures and their financing of oil sands, and they said they would no longer finance Arctic exploration. And we found, and they said this in an investor presentation, and we found a document produced by like 300 NGOs, some significant, I won't name them, but it showed actually data to the contrary. They'd only increased their involvement in the oil sands. So I took this to the CEO and I said, like, look, I'm coming from a place of love here. I'm saying, why would you put yourself out there and say you're not going to do something when you ended up doing it? You should have probably better communicated and better consolidated your operations and had them talking to each other to really agree upon what could realistically be stated and what realistically could be achieved. Because you've done to the contrary, and a lot of stakeholders will not be happy about this. And he kind of said to me, he was quite a thoughtful man, the CEO, and he was at first a little defensive, but then he was like, yeah, you know what? This is not very good. And we really, really do have to do better. And ESG really, at its heart, is mostly about what are you saying and what are you doing? And most companies right now are saying 80% of ESG and doing 20% of ESG. And we really want to move the dial so that they're doing, really like what some of the most sustainable companies, and we mentioned Corporate Knights in their list, and most of these companies are really doing 80% ESG and talking 20% ESG. And what you will find with that magic formula is that if you're doing 80% ESG, people will notice you. They'll notice your actions because actions speak better than words. And they'll actually create media around you to say, oh, look what this company's doing. And, oh, aren't they sort of an example of what should be done? And so you don't have to talk as much.
Yeah. And, in your example, I think that was an important example because, excuse me, it goes to show that people do have good intentions, right? They do want to set out to be on this course of becoming very ESG friendly. They want to make a change, but there are certain policies that have been around for a while now. If you take banks and their lending, for instance, like they've been doing that for as long as they've been in existence, and they've lent to everyone. And as it was mentioned in the previous conversation that I had with our panel, we've used these sources, and so obviously they were viable for us at that time. And it's important to keep in mind that all these firms are also transitioning. So it's good that they realize their mistake and they're doing it, right? And I think for you to have those types of conversations where you're bringing it to their attention is really important because now they realize it. Because obviously everyone wants to go out there, they want to say the right things. And, you can argue that they ultimately also want to do the right things. But it can be difficult because sometimes you have contracts in place. There's, like a whole lot of things that are in the background that we're not privy to. So for them to, say we are going to, for instance, cut out funding, it's very possible they have that full on intention, but it's just that they also have contractual obligations to meet. So for, that is a plan that needs to be set in action, and then they need to move towards it. But if we talk about funding, something that I think is also really important, and I want to speak about it with the panel, but unfortunately we didn't have the time today, is transitional funding, right? Like transitional funding is big, and you can't just, say that a firm is not ESG positive, so we just cut out all funding to them. they want to become, if they genuinely want to become positive, there are avenues for them to do that, and that is transition bonds, which are very big in Europe, and Europe is known to be very green because they've had these types of facilities set up to help their firms, and I think it's something that we need more of in North America. Because we do have these corporations who want to move in a more ESG friendly direction, but they do need an avenue to get there. And so transitional bonds are really important. I think they will play a big part in our future to help these firms live up to the words that they're saying, you know, do the actions, not just the talking.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think so. You've raised the whole conversation around divestiture versus sort of hold and advocate. You've talked about market forces, and you've talked about vehicles to actually catalyze change, right? So if we're talking about like divestiture versus hold or underweight or threat to underweight and advocate, that's a big conversation around that. So a lot of investment firms are saying they're going to totally divest in this industry because it's dirty, or they just that's an exclusionary, or they used to call that negative screening, right? And so there's an argument for that. I don't think that really helps. What I think it helps is to have some teeth in the game. So that would be to maintain your position, right? Or maintain weighting, but threat to underweight, and then advocate, push the company to improve, push the company to make a bit of progress. And then you brought up the subject of sort of market forces. So like banks, right? Banks sort of have a lot of influence because they are the gatekeepers of the money, and the money is really the grease of the whole economy. It makes things work. It makes things happen, right? So the banks really play a key role, and this role is the whole role of sustainable financing, right? And that's the other point you brought up with regards to transition bonds. Transition bonds is like one vehicle or one mechanism within the sustainable finance sort of tool set, right? There's sustainability loans, there's sustainability bonds, there's green bonds, right? And all these vehicles are a form of financing where the banks can actually work with the company. So how they actually work is there's like sort of key performance indicators that are ESG related built into the bond, and in order to meet those sort of, and then they establish targets. In order to sort of get the money, it's contingent upon environmental or ESG performance, right? Depending on if it's a social bond or if it's a pure ESG bond or is focused on governance, right? And so in order to get the money and then to get the money again, they have to show that they're going to perform. And they actually get the money at a slight discount to market, right? In order to, sort of encourage people to issue in this way. And I think it's an amazing vehicle. And it has been used well, and then it has been used not well. And there's been some, conversation around greenwashing, unfortunately. And that's when I think right at the end of the conversation of the panel, I forget who brought it up, but the creativity of of the financial industry or the creativity of companies to sort of, I think it was Bob probably, to sort of find ways of doing what's asked, but going around the rules, or sort of bending the rules to be more preferential or more advantageous towards what they want to achieve, maybe not exactly the objectives of ESG. So,
right. No, that's a good point. And I think, again, it does all go back to this being a very young field still. And as there's more exposure to things like transition bonds in this market, it will get better. People will learn to read it. I mean, ESG has been around for, well over a decade now. And right now we're finally tackling the issue of greenwashing. So things just need time and exposure to make them more effective and ultimately serve the true purpose that they're meant to serve. Because you will always have those individuals who want to play around the rules, who may not have the best intentions. But I like to believe that for the most part, people usually do have good intentions, and it's just a way. They just need a way to figure out how best to do things. Now we do need to wrap up here, but I wanted to give the final word to you on, CGI's mission
Yeah.
within this space and what we're hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, so what we're hoping to accomplish is to develop this advisory and consulting business to help our clients really both transition and really drive their ESG purpose and integrate it fully into their operations. We also have a solutions oriented because, as CGI develops a lot of IP. So we have some fantastic IP solutions like, we have satellites that can, predict wildfires. We have and they're currently involved in a big project in the UK for seagrass, which is one of the biggest carbon sinks in the world, with smart metering, so Internet of Things type solutions. And we have sort of more advisory type solutions, like we have our sort of maturity assessment and many other offerings on the advisory side that we are going to bring to clients in a best practice manner in order to help them achieve their goals.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having this conversation with me, Matt. I've learned a lot, and I think it's important for the market to know that CGI is very dedicated to ESG. This is a field that we're putting a fair bit of resources into because we genuinely want to make a change, and we're always here to help clients.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Of course.